tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I learned about a letter in the Hebrew alphabet recently named Yod. And it's the smallest letter in the alphabet. It's a small kind of dot, or often just the smallest line vertically. It's known as the finger of God or the hand of God. And it's the first letter in the word Yahweh, Yahweh for God. And it has the connotations of 10 for perfection and of humility. And this idea that the doorway to God in the theistic conception is through the most humble of all marks, that this is the essential mark, the beginning letter, I think touches at the core truth of Buddhist thought and spiritual practice in general. The concept of anatta, or not self, which the Buddha taught, can seem very abstract when you first encounter it. People often ask, if there's no self, what's reborn? What carries karma? And this is getting it backwards. It's conceiving of karma, habit, momentum, craving, in the context of a self. Whereas in Buddhism, the self occurs in the context of karma. The mind is a stream of conditions, a river that eddies, has patterns for a time, but shifts. The banks silt, the trajectory changes, the rapids move. But one of those eddies is the eddy of a self, the pattern of creating a self, the feeling of a self. And you notice this as you practice the different selves that form, the sense of solidification and reification are different. They have different flavors. They speak with different voices. We have our victimization self, our self-righteous self. That's a fun one. The justifying self. The self is something we do. It's a pattern. In Buddhism, in Pali, it's called ahankara mamankara. I-making and mind-making is the term the Buddha used for it. And to know that when you stop doing that, you aren't left with a cold nothing. This insidious narrative makes its way into so many parts of our lives. If I'm not stressed, how will I succeed? If I don't have anger, if I don't express anger, how will I affect change? And one of the most important movements of practice is seeing that when you release that palsied grip on something to attach to as a self, whether a pattern or a feeling, the hand opens and is not left with nothing, but rather with a palm filled with sunlight, a deep dharmic resonance, a sensitivity and agility. The Buddha said, one with wisdom achieves deep wisdom, gambhira panya, laughing wisdom, swift wisdom, hasapanya, kipapanya. And you'll see this is that the sankhara, the patterning we form around for selves, the ahankara, mamankara, the I-making and my-making, what it does is it solidifies and encrusts you. And we all know people, even ourselves, where after decades of accumulating these patterns, sankhara programs, you can almost not see the heart through it. Someone said the opposite of life isn't death, it's a machine. And this is the accumulation of what happens of a life, in a life lived without mindfulness. The Buddha said, those who are heedless are as if already dead. Those who are heedful never die. And when you see a being who's truly practiced well, you sense in them an agility, an ability to adapt to any moment, to align with a deep song, a tune of Dhamma, which runs through each life. This simile runs through the suttas, the Buddha's words, where he talks about one lives in tune with Dhamma, in line with Dhamma, in harmony with Dhamma. And what does that speak to but a song? I know some tribes call it a tapping in the chest, the sense of walking in line with something. And the only route to that is humility. There's the story of, I think it's Elijah, where he heard that God would be passing the mountain, and he walked out. And first there was the wind, and God was not in the wind. And then there was the earthquake, and God was not in the earthquake. And then there was the fire, and God was not in the fire. And then there was a still, small voice. And it said, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? The only way we hear that question and answer it is through the softness of humility, through opening the hand and trusting, through wisdom. And much of the time, tracing the Dhamma in our lives, following its path, is like tracing a deer, following a deer. Every now and again, it comes to us as a lion with those clear, bright moments in a life that burn in you. But most of the time, it's that daily, careful following of something quiet. And you have to be quiet to touch that. And so we have to give up this constant making of a self and learn to trust something much deeper and more subtle. The Buddha spoke about how we form self from 3 different kinds of proliferation. Etang mama, this is mine. That's craving proliferation. Tanha papancha, this is mine. Eso asmi, I am this. Eso me atati, I am this, or this is myself. And eso asmi, I am this, is just a subtle fact that the self forms in the shadow of language. Each word so often has in it hidden the implication of a subject which is reified and real. Whereas eso me atati, this is myself, is a much more explicit identification. I am American, I am Democrat, I am Buddhist. And we let go of all these. And I think the most fascinating distinction between the level of identification as a view, I am this, versus, or this is myself, versus the subtle, eso asmi, I am this, is the story of Venerable Khemika, who was a monk on his deathbed. And these other elders sent someone to ask, do you attach to any of these aggregates of identity, the body, feeling, perception, consciousness, mental formations, as you and yours? And he said, no, I don't. And the interlocutor said, so are you enlightened? Are you an arahant? And he said, no, I'm not. And the questioner further asked, if you don't attach to any of these as yours, how are you not enlightened already? And Venerable Khemika said, it's like a flower. You can say you don't know that the scent comes from the petals or the stem or the stamen, and yet a scent still lingers. Even so, I do not attach to any of these things as me and mine, but the scent of self still lingers. And he became the only monk in all the suttas to achieve enlightenment from his own Dharma talk. So he'd given up the sense of explicit identification, but that subtle sense of lingering self still remained. It's much more subtle. It's only given up at full enlightenment. And conceit in Buddhism, mana, it manifests not just as better than, but also worse than or equal to. Each of these sense of reifying a self. And often we have a mistaken perception of humility in the West where self-deprecation, self-flagellation is mistaken as some sort of humility, and it is not. There is a narcissism, a circling around one's sense of self, even in that. So what is humility then in Buddhism? And I'd say that this creation of self, most of you know the Four Noble Truths, the categorical teaching of the Buddha. He talks about suffering based on craving, unwholesome thirst. And this is the impact of suffering, the impact of unwholesome clinging or selfing. That's the pendulum swinging back and hitting you. But what about the initial pendulum out, creating a self around something, self-righteousness, victimization, any of these, anger? And to note that when the Buddha spoke of suffering, he talked about a palpitation, a perturbation, a dart, an arrow, alien, a disintegration. And so when you sense in you that sense of heat, quivering, shaking, vibration, coalescing, this is self. The first two noble truths instantiate. And then when you let go of that, when the anger passes and you're left with coolness, when the sense of fear of missing out, FOMO, fades, and you find it's okay. When the doubt ceases and you find that so often problems are not solved, they dissolve. You find yourself resting in the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, peace, and this quality of light, luminosity, coolness. This is anatta, not self. One teacher of Ajahn Nisabho said, if you want to understand anatta, just understand atta, anatta, that movement. And we talk about emptiness in Buddhism, but it sounds like a cold nothing, and empty of self, full of reality. Empty of self, full of reality, full of light. The Buddha compared the enlightened mind to light that lands on nothing. This is not a dark end goal. There's an agility to that moment, and each of us knows how to touch that in some measure. You know that feeling when the vibrating ego, screaming to be heard and expressed, fades, and you find it's okay. And you find on the other side of that narrow valley of difficulty, of being compelled to act, there is a majesty of spirit waiting. And very importantly, you know what that looks like in someone whose wingspan is truly great. I think all of us have had moments of encountering a being utterly humble in a way that touched us maybe more deeply than we'd almost ever seen. I remember one bhikkhuni I knew, actually she was a seminary, and I asked, why did you ordain? And she said, it was just one more step in disappearing. And yet the majesty of her poise and silence was a thunderclap in its own right. I remember meeting a man in Vancouver who used to be a disciple of, or a steward at Ajahn Sona's, and I believe he had Parkinson's and could not speak easily. And so I only heard him say a few sentences, but the sweetness in his face is what still remains with me after that trip all these years later. Remember that wingspan of spirit that comes from humility, because when the ego and atta cries to be heard and expressed, what often will sustain you through that without acting, what often will let you trust the ground you may come to if you let it pass, is remembering the majesty that hides on the other side and that humility, that wingspan of humility. So the words for humility in Buddhism, we have nivata, which is really fun. Vat means wind. Ni means down. So you're literally unpuffing up. You're letting out the wind, popping the bubble. Nivata. Let go of your puffed upness. The other word is apicca. Icha is desire, craving. Apa is little, one of little wishes. And this aspect of humility and wanting little are intimately related. The Buddha in the simile of the snake sutta says, practitioners, where there is the thought me, would there be the thought this belongs to me? Yes, Lord. And where the thought this belongs to me exists, would there be the thought I am? Yes, Lord. If you do not see your selfing, wait until the moment when something's being ripped from you. Wait until it's being compromised, and you will see very clearly where that self hides. It's important to keep an eye out for those moments, because that self forms in the shadow of craving. Notice those moments. And so often this is very clear in the moments of, say, anger. You see something pushed, and the sense of self-righteous anger, which is one of the most addictive of drugs, the sense of self and solidity and energy, it's so solid. And yet so much suffering. And whenever you see that self comes out, that's the pendulum going out, and you know, Ajahn Nisabho says, whenever that happens, whenever I find myself operating from that place, just think to yourself, about to suffer, okay. Or like Ajahn Chah said, not sure, just add in that, not sure, 95%. But where it's more subtle is when it's pleasant. That's the other side of the coin that traps us. Gain, honor, and praise, the Buddha said, are a harsh, bitter obstacle to the unexcelled relief from bondage. Be wary of gain, honor, and praise, practitioners. And in one sutta, he talks about, in terms of a different defilement, but a tree deva, a tree spirit, who sees a malava seed. It's a creeper that strangles trees, land at its base. And all the other trees say, that's a bad creeper, you should keep a watch on that. And the tree says, it's just a little seed. And then it extends a gentle, velvety vine and touches the bark of the tree. And all the other trees say that, okay, you should really look out at that one. But the tree thinks, oh, it just feels so nice, like it's just a velvety kind of touch, until it's completely wound around and strangled. And gain, honor, and praise are such. Notice as you're praised, the glow, the soaking it in, the delight, and watch out, because it will be ripped away. These things are impermanent, inevitably. And one thing I find very meaningful is there's a list in the commentaries of the 27 types of pride, and it's an amazing list. Pride in one's family, pride in one's youth, pride in health, pride in being a good speaker, pride in wealth, pride in intelligence, pride in eloquence, pride in being properly proportioned, pride in having good sila. Anyone have that? When you look at your friends who aren't keeping those 5 precepts or whatever it is. Pride in being tall. I've never had to worry about that one. Thank you. And it's hilarious because I'll go through this and be like, nope, that one got me. And there's always something hiding there. Where is the maul of a creeper digging its roots slowly into you? And the Buddha devoted a whole chapter of the connected discourses to gain, honor, and praise. Labha Sakara Siloka. He said, do not wish gain, honor, and praise on anyone. The Buddha said a dung beetle might sit on top of his big pile of dung and say, yes, sirree, I'm a dung beetle. This is my pile of dung. I have eaten my fill and have enough for tomorrow. Even so, a mendicant comes back from alms round, thinking, I have received invitations from a family. I've eaten my fill and have invitations for tomorrow. Such a mendicant is like the dung beetle. There's a Dhammapada verse where the Buddha says, let them all be known, let them all know it was done by me in each and everything. Let all of them, mendicants, lay people, be under my power, thinking thus the fool's pride only grows. So remembering that all these things fade, and the Buddha prescribed perception of impermanence as the antidote. Milarepa, the famous Tibetan yogi, said, all worldly pursuits have but one inevitable end, which is sorrow. Meetings end in partings, acquisition in dispersion, buildings in destruction, birth and death. Knowing this, one should, from the very start, renounce meeting and building and acquiring, and, faithful to the commands of an eminent teacher, go about realizing the truth which hath no birth or death. This alone is the best science. This alone is the best science. So just note, when you're soaking in the glow, that these things will fade. And that as we practice, we're beginning to touch something much deeper. There's a famous Christian saying that the less well known, the greater the angel. And to think of all those quiet practitioners through thousands of years who've lived in seclusion doing small acts of goodness, those small acts of goodness and great hearts around which the world has turned, in quiet circles that hold the center. This is how we affect. You do not know what acts of goodness echo out. This is so often the hinges on which our lives switch trajectory. Someone was saying in regards to our announcement last Saturday about the land, it can't be undone. This land can't, this moment can't be undone. And on one level, of course it can. The monastery things can happen, they will happen. On another level, the goodness that has been cultivated, these quiet acts of hearts coming together, of finding faith and refuge, this cannot be undone. This will echo out. Having faith in that. Having faith in this deeper narrative we've touched into, beyond gain, honor, and praise. This is just a suit of clothes we wear for one life. And even if you don't believe in multiple lives, the echo of goodness you put out remains. That is what matters. That is the gift to the world. How people think of your name afterwards, it's nothing. And that's the one other type of pride I forgot to mention, pride in not being despised. It's good, right? The Buddha. So when you see this, Ajahn Anand, my teacher, when we asked him about Mara, the embodiment of defilement in Buddhism, he's not like Satan where he's down in the lower realms. Mara in Buddhism is a very high angel, and he controls everything else. And Ajahn Anand says, and that means he can co-opt all those qualities of the angels for his own. So Longpo Anand said, when someone comes to the monastery really wanting to be seen, giving, wanting to be prominent, wanting to be the foremost, that is Mara's epithet, is Adhipateya, foremost in authority, in control. That is Mara coming. And yeah, we all have Mara in the sidecar. We all want to be seen to some extent. It's there. But notice it. And go against the stream. The Christians call it agare contra, against the stream. And it's a very powerful practice. When you want to go to the front of the line, see if you can go to the back. When you want to be seen giving something, give it to someone else to give for you. When you want to be seen giving a gift, do it anonymously. Who here remembers the person who put $100 bills on the back table for everyone to take? And that's sort of a trick question because none of you remember the person because you don't know who it was. I do. But you remember that act, and it glows in a whole different way because of that fact. The Thais call this putting gold leaf on the back of a Buddha statue. And you find that if you do this, first, somehow things just do get known often. But also you'll find the karma is magnified. I remember cleaning bathrooms at my monastery just one day completely, kind of just really wanting to not be seen, or I think I probably wanted to be seen, but I made myself not tell anyone, etc. And the amount of goodness that came that day was astounding. This echoes, it magnifies the echoes in a way that's, I think, hard to quantify. What happens about making a practice of one anonymous act of goodness every day? Putting gold leaf on the back of a Buddha statue. In Thailand, people will put gold leaf on the front often, and the back no one ever sees, but you can put gold leaf there too. And very importantly, just this agare contra in everyday life, when in these social dynamics, we rejoice in community like this, and yet community is suffering too. It's really hard. You find that when you step into these places, all the old patterns get activated in and out, wanting to be seen, wanting to be special. And noticing when you see people talking and wish you were talking, when you see people laughing and wish you were there with them, watching the ego, that vibrating wound, vibrate, and just letting it vibrate out. Do not act from that place. That is the first noble truth, and your duty then is to comprehend it and be with it carefully and stop. Don't dilute yourself. Because if you go with that, you will find every time you feel you've drained something precious from yourself. Joseph Goldstein talks about the word we have for idle chatter, sampapalapa. And it's a great word. And he says, whenever I sampapalapa, I realize the only purpose is to announce myself. And when I restrain that, I always find I feel richer for it. Words worth treasuring. And so what I'll do is I'll really, if that's strong in me, if that ragged edge of suffering is there that's dragging me around a social situation, just go into another room for 2 minutes and close your eyes, recenter, find yourself again. Then come from that place, and it changes everything. You're no longer a hungry ghost. And you'll notice that if you see someone doing that, holding back in quiet, you don't dismiss them for that. There's something profoundly powerful about that you do see and sense. The Buddha said, if you wish to be dear to your companions in the holy life, delight in empty huts. It's always struck me. And it's true, I've gone to monasteries and you want to be liked by all the monks because we're monks and people and have defilement, some of us, me. And if I act from that, it never succeeds. It always fails. It's always more suffering. And I find the monastics that kind of glow in my heart afterwards are the ones that I saw aligning with Dhamma, and because they tuned themselves to that note of Dhamma, the echo remained with me all the time later. They lost nothing for that. Remember, there's a different metric at play now. You have a deeper narrative, a deeper refuge. If you align with the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, that deep resonant note that guides, there is your path. Anatta is not nothing. It's somehow the photographic negative of how we look at the world, the trees of light between the trees. The trees of light between the trees, the cracks between the people, the moments of silent and quiet between those moments of vibrating heat, and the majesty that is hidden in them. Ajahn Amaro had a vision of a teacher named Master Hua who came to him and said, bright, loud, and mobile is the false. Subtle and indistinct is the true. Bright, loud, and mobile is the false. Subtle and indistinct is the true. Can you tune your ears to that melody? And the next, to know how to go against the stream in terms of apology. And to understand that one of the ways you'll see yourself reify a self is when you've done something unbeautiful. And maybe it was completely justified by worldly metrics. And I will find myself doing this sort of chewing over a thing, saying, I was right because of this, because of this. And I realize it's me justifying something that my heart knows wasn't right. Ajahn Panyavada compares dukkha, suffering, to pushing down a ping pong ball that's constantly trying to spring up to the top of water. Just keep on pushing it down because the dharma wants to come up. And you notice that, like, something in you knows that wasn't beautiful. Maybe I was right. Maybe I was correct, but I was not right. And just to say, okay, I give up. I bow to that. Okay, what do you have to lose but your suffering? What do you have to lose but yourself? What's to be gained? What's to be lost but greater? There's such majesty to be gained in that. And I think we've all seen that when we reapproach a conflict that faded, just apologizing for our side of things with true humility. Never, Benjamin Franklin said, never ruin an apology with an excuse. He also said some people die at 25 and are buried at 75. Benjamin Franklin was a wealth of good wisdom. But to truly know how to apologize and to accept with humility that, and to know what impact that has on someone. You lose nothing. Someone asked, how do I teach my children to be good practitioners? And this person said, apologize to them when you do something wrong. That's the most powerful lesson you could give them. Just the instantiation of humility at that level. So that humility, asking forgiveness, not justifying. And then gratitude. There's a sutta where a deva asks a monk, these teachings, are they from you or from the Buddha? And the monk says, everything, imagine that you had a heap of golden grain and the villagers would come with baskets of it. Would you say that grain came from them or from the baskets? And the deva says, from the heap of grain. And the deva says, well, I'd say it came from the heap of grain. And he said, even so, every good word I have spoken comes from the Buddha. All these teachings. And to remember that all the goodness in our lives, granted there is choice, but these are all gifts from others that have been given to us. Gratitude. The Buddha said that one who, without giving up 5 kinds of stinginess, one cannot attain enlightenment, stream entry even. Stinginess with regards to one's wealth, followers, status, housing, and miserliness in general. One cannot see enlightenment with any of those stickings of the heart. Gratitude is inseparable from enlightenment. When we realize we are the heirs to great gifts, and it's our job to steward those onwards. When there's a sutta called the Kinti Sutta where, and this is important, when people praise you, can you say, I've just been given my teachers have given me such guidance. I learned so well from my mother. How can you duck under it and let it, you can say, I'm really glad it touched you that way, but can you duck and let it pass right to something else? This is the beauty of it. When the Buddha advised monastics in how to resolve conflict, he said, say a monastic resolves a conflict between factions, and they asked, how did you do that? Instead of saying, I went to those bhikkhus and I taught them and I resolved the conflict, one should say, I went to the Buddha and I heard the Blessed One and I heard the Dhamma. Having heard the Dhamma, I went to those bhikkhus and I taught them the Dhamma. I spoke the Dhamma. Having heard the Dhamma, those practitioners emerged from the unwholesome and immersed themselves in the wholesome. There's no self in that. And before Ajahn Kovilo and I give a talk, usually when I'm up here meditating, this is one of the things I'll be reciting in my mind. In the Kassapa Samyutta, the Buddha says, a bhikkhu may teach the Dhamma with the thought thus, having heard the Dhamma, may they gain faith. Having gained faith, and may they show their faith in me. Such a bhikkhu is not fit to teach the Dhamma. Or, a bhikkhu may think, the Dhamma is well expounded by the Blessed One. apparent here and now, timeless, encouraging investigation, leading inwards to be experienced individually by the wise. Having heard the Dhamma, may they remember the Dhamma. Having remembered the Dhamma, may they practice the Dhamma in line with the Dhamma. Therefore, such a bhikkhu teaches the Dhamma out of respect for the Dhamma, because of the intrinsic excellence of the Dhamma. Such a bhikkhu is fit to teach the Dhamma. Recite that every time. Bowing. And even the Buddha said after his enlightenment, I have no teacher now. Who do I dwell with respect for? Because one who dwells without respect dwells in pain. And he says, I will dwell holding the Dhamma as my teacher. So always remembering all these gifts come from those beautiful people around us and from the practice and from the ripples of goodness. And for many of us, those ripples of goodness emanate from the enlightened mind 2,500 years ago who left us with these teachings. What a blessing. An unexcelled field of goodness. And maybe I'll just end with parents. Ajahn Nisabho talks about being in Persia, Iran, when he was a young boy or a young man wandering across Eurasia without money. He slept rolled up in a carpet through the mountains of Afghanistan, and he came to Iran, and he lost his passport. And he was wandering through the streets looking very dirty, and a woman came out of her house, took one look at him, sort of an old mother, and just curtly motioned him over and pointed up the stairs, and she had him go up there, pointed to the bathroom, had him take a shower. As soon as he was done, she had a whole new set of clothes for him. She didn't say a single word. Then she put, she was looking at her watch or the clock because she had to go to work soon, he assumed. She put a meal in front of him, and then after he'd eaten, she ushered him down the stairways and out into the street again, and then they left, and they didn't exchange one word that whole time. And he was clothed and fed. And months later, he was in India at an ashram, and that memory came to his mind. And tears started rolling down his cheeks for the grace of that woman. And then he thought, my parents have done this for me every single day, and I have never thought of them. In Buddhist thought, we owe great debts of gratitude to the parents, remembering this also with humility. So, may all of you find that grace of movement, that majesty of quiet, and may you be well.
หันธรรมยังธรรมคาถาสาธุการังทดามาเสสาธุสาธุสาธุอนุโมทามิ
One thing I forgot to mention is in the Vinaya, by the monastic rule, we're not allowed to give admonishment to another person unless there's 15 conditions. But two key ones are unless we're speaking from a mind of loving kindness and unless we've asked and received permission. And in terms of checking that self-righteous ego, those two conditions in a relationship are such a powerful firewall. I think people should really consider taking them on. Okay, so we have time for some questions now. People can raise their hands and we'll run a mic over to you. And if you're on Zoom, you can raise your cartoon hand as well. Alex, I think we got Hayden over yonder. Oh, or over there, either one. Sorry.
Good morning, Ajahn. So at the sort of beginning of your talk, you were talking about how we have to kind of get rid of the self, and we're trying to sort of get rid of this self that's conditioned through life and all of the patterns that we come to. My question then is, where do our personalities come from once we're at that level? My sort of example would be two kind of enlightened people who have perfected this kind of no self, still have different speech patterns, still have different interests, still have different desires and different friends. where does that kind of thing come from?
Great question. I would say there's a twofold answer here. One is we do change the patterns of our personality through this practice. Loving kindness and other elements echo out, and things we've identified as part of us, those narratives can be insidious and they aren't always true. I'm someone who, I'm just a little coarse. I like a little sarcasm. Maybe not, actually. Maybe that changes. And to know desire as a whole is not against the Buddhist path. There's tanha, which is craving desire, which is fixated on outcome, and it's hot and burns. It's the source of unwholesome suffering. And then there's chanda, which can be wholesome, and it's like zeal or enthusiasm. It's focused on the act itself and rejoicing in it. And so more and more our personality structures and trajectories, which are intimately related, come from a much deeper place in alignment with something here. And you just get a feel for that, the difference between this and this. But then also there is a limit, you're right, where if some of you might know the character of Longta Mahabua, who is renowned for being fierce. I mean, he could really be fierce. And then Longpo Cha, much more kind of, could be a lot more, say, welcoming to his Western disciples or something. And I think there just comes a point where that is our prior conditioning, just like our body is and our knowledge and our personalities, they remain. Someone once read Ajahn Chah's palm, and he was like just staring at it. He says, you have a lot of anger. And Ajahn Chah said, yeah, but I don't pick it up. So the Buddha said the source of suffering isn't the aggregates. He said it's the aggregates affected by clinging. So there is some part, Ajahn Amaro remembers encountering Ajahn Chah in meditation and clearing his throat a few times, and Ajahn Chah opened his eyes, and in that moment, Ajahn Amaro said there was nothing there. It was like emptiness. And then he saw the personality manifest like a mask being put on. And so those teachers can really have agility with switching personalities, but also I think it's important, like our personalities and our faults, often there's great treasure hidden in them. One of the most famous matadors in Spain, when he was a child, he was afraid of everything, and he'd always hide behind his mother's skirts, a bit like a matador would. And you'll see these echoes, like the things that was your greatest weakness becomes your greatest kind of majesty later. And somehow you sense that because you're touching the dharmic path through these personal conditions, there is a pure root to even work with one's personality as it remains. I don't know if that answered the question at all, but yeah. My sense is, like you can change the song a little bit, but also only so much. And then what's left can become perfect, even in its imperfection, or even in its particularity. And I think that's one of the great parts of having different visitors, is you get to see how the Dharma shines through different people, like utterly different in different personalities, and they can't fake it. You can't kind of try to embody something you're not at a certain level. Hayden.
Thank you. There are certain undertakings, maybe building a building or planting a garden or writing a book that feel wholesome, and yet there can also be, they can be so satisfying and so compelling that there's, kind of a covert stickiness there that doesn't feel quite so wholesome. Can you talk about a wholesome relationship to wholesome undertakings?
In the gradual training, and there's an amazing sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 39, the Maha-Asapura Sutta, about the whole path. A lot of the qualities, like cultivating good virtue, end with a phrase where the Buddha says, one does not exalt oneself or disparage others based on that virtue. Who here has canoed before and knows the J stroke? It's like a little stroke, you leave the paddle in a little long, and that keeps the canoe from like turning in a circle. There's always the J stroke in Buddhism. Is like, do the good, but then note, okay, there's Mara, I see him in the sidecar, there's the stickiness, and say, about to suffer, this will fade too. you know? And that's the beauty of meditation, is you get to see more and more when that comes up and the suffering involved. And then when it's inevitably ripped away or compromised, we can't hit home runs every time. We just can't, you know? And so you begin just to get a feel for a deeper refuge. Yeah, I'd say that. And meditation is really key for that, and contemplation. Ajahn Chah said, just keep the words mene in your mind all the time. That means not sure, not sure. And it helps sometimes to repeat the phrase really slowly. When you find yourself fixating on someone changing or finishing a certain thing, say it really slowly. If I finish this book, I will be happy forever. You know, and just like shine the spotlight on it and see how it stands up. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have a push over there.
Thank you very much for that meditation and talk. And I have a question that actually relates to the question that just was asked. It's because in the beginning at the meditation, you were saying recall giving and recall goodness. And the way I interpreted that is that recall that I have done good things and I've given, and so, you know, I'm a good person. And like the question that was just asked is, you know, okay, but there can be a problem with that. If I say I'm a good person, then there could be pride. So I really liked what you said about humility. And so I'll just share how I kind of help me with this, is the idea of, you know, I know a lot of people debate about this, whether we have free will or not. And I kind of lean towards that we don't have free will. And everything that I have and that I can do was given to me. It's not something I freely chose. So if I can be good, that was given to me. And if I can be giving, then that was given to me. And it kind of helps me then to just have gratitude. Like, wow, I'm so grateful that I'm able to do this. I can be a good person. So that's just what I was thinking.
Thank you. Yeah, I think like most spiritual depths, there's paradox. And one of those is that as you let go of that selfing, you come into alignment with sort of a deeper attunement where you can act from and move from. And recollecting that almost just increases that resonance. And over time, in some sense, you are forming a wholesome sense of self, but it's a very deep sense of self that integrates many patterns of your being and psyche at profound levels, from the action to the deepest strata of evolutionarily kind of conditioned, some proclivities in that realm too, and spiritual. So recollecting that goodness really brings that to the fore. And in the end, you're challenging the Buddha. The Buddha says all things are not self. So how beautiful can you make the self? How much can you bring your mental circumstances under your ability to keep bright and wholesome? And the Buddha says all things are impermanent. So how lasting can you make those bright mind states? The Buddha says all things are dukkha, suffering. So how happy and luminous can you make the mind? And then after you've pushed that to the limit, so they say the wall breaks and some other dimension opens up completely. But we push samsara to its limit first, and you do find just intuitively that deep resonance forms. And as to free will, I would just mention the Buddha really, you know, these rabbit holes that Western philosophy spent a few thousand years running around without, I think, real impact. The Buddha, I think, said you can go so far. It's useful to know we are affected by conditions, but you do have choice. And as to like drilling down into the ontological fundamentals of that, I think the human psyche, like comprehending the difference between light as a particle and a wave, quantum mechanics has revealed very clearly the limits of our ability of human logic as a subset of the universe to understand the universe. Like, and free will in some sense is a question of like, are we a fish in a wave or a stick in a wave? What if it's all wave? You know, like there's predicates hidden within the question that are unexamined. And Gödel's incompleteness theorem points to the fact that every system of mathematics that is coherent enough to sustain like equation will have an unprovable axiom at its basis. And so the Buddha just kind of stopped where things got not useful. So I think this is what you're speaking about. And like in these moments of gratitude, leaning into that recollection is what's wholesome. In moments where we've messed up, leaning into our, like saying like, oh, I don't want to do that again. I'm going to be really careful to not do that. Leaning into our agency might be the effective approach. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Someday maybe we'll have Sam Harris talk about this for like 2 hours, but probably not. It's an endless one. I think one more.
Yeah, thanks for that talk today. And I'm kind of new, and so I just started coming here, and I don't even know if I have a question or not. Just like a comment of, I feel like I really don't have a strong sense of self. A lot of the times, I get really frustrated, with what that means, and a lot of what I say is like I used to struggle, and I still do, with anxiety. And just like a lot of complex PTSD, and I feel like I'm a lot of the times I just like am so frustrated with life that I just want to run away. But the truth is, like, I can't run away from this broken self that I feel all the time, and I have a hard time understanding things. I have a hard time understanding people and dealing with emotions, and I isolate a lot, and I get more and more frustrated every day that I feel like I cannot connect with not only myself, but my community. And a lot of the times I just feel like I'm faking it. I'm like really good at faking it, that I'm good at faking that everything's okay. And it's not okay. And I don't even know what to do anymore.
Can I ask your name? Yeah, thank you. I think you're in good company. We talk about the first noble truthers and the third noble truthers, people who come to these teachings because of their suffering or because they see the brightness. And I think I've got a lot of first noble truthers here. And it's interesting because in depression, there's a seed of deep wisdom. Often you're looking at the world and saying, this is empty. And the problem with that is often it's Plato's prisoners seeing that the cave is just shadows, but they don't know where to turn their head to see the light. And what I'd say is first, running from the broken sense of self doesn't work, obviously. Jung said, what you don't acknowledge becomes your destiny. And so there is a place for turning towards that. And that's part of meditation, is seeing those patterns. But then there's also a place beyond that. And that's, I think, where Buddhism surpasses Western psychology, is it brightens the substrate of the mind and heart through meditation, giving, ethics. Sila, keeping good virtue and community, is so healing. And eventually you find like that sense of connection actually begins to form almost unbidden in a way you hadn't expected. But that growing glow takes a long time, and in the meantime, it's the slow boil. There's a lot of suffering. I mean, you have no choice. There's like one sort of suffering, another sort of suffering, but also I can say that the people I've found who've really had to confront that have a depth to them and a richness that lets them. I think we've all met people in our lives that have somewhat porcelain hearts. They've never been cracked open, and that suffering can be a route to compassion if it's held in the crucible of practice with a direction to go with it. So thank you for sharing, and you're in good company. And just keep on coming to the potlucks, all right? We'll walk this one together. Peace, I like it. Thank you, yeah. Okay, we do have to wrap up, I'm sorry.